Hello, everybody. Welcome to Amaze on Stream. I'm Melissa Simonson, and I'm so excited this week to introduce you guys to Michael Veazey with Amazing FBA. Michael, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be on this side of the interview. I'm normally interviewing people for the podcast, so it's really, really nice to have a chance to chat to you and relax and let you drive.
Well, I'm excited about that too, because really, I think a lot of people, when you are doing your podcast, people get to know the people that you're interviewing and they learn a lot, but maybe they don't know a ton about you. So let's dive right in and learn a little bit more about you.
Yeah, by all means.
Okay,
Um,
so when we were just, prior to actually hitting record, you were telling me that entrepreneurship actually was not natural to you. You had kind of a different path to that. So I want to start then with your parents. Were your parents entrepreneurs?
Really kind of the opposite. My dad was a lawyer, so nothing sort of what I guess ham and eggs lawyer is what John Grisham would call him, or General High Street. So, not at all entrepreneurial, more risk averse. I mean, he worked with some entrepreneurs to help with contracts and stuff, but you go to a lawyer with a contract and they'll find 55 ways your business could fail and things to worry about, which is what you pay them for, but it's not really a very entrepreneurial mindset. My mother was a teacher, and her mother was a teacher as well, and I think her mother's father was a lawyer. So there are a lot of people that want to be very precise about things and don't take risks and get a job and be conventional. So the opposite to an entrepreneurial parent, I would
Yeah,
say.
it sounds like they had sort of the very traditional career paths. And so
Yeah.
when you were growing up, was that an influence on you? Did they kind of encourage that for you as well?
I guess, yeah, they weren't very prescriptive, I guess, which is good and bad, I guess. Overall, I'm grateful that I was allowed to find my own path. The one thing that they did that really influenced me, I suppose, was, well, a few things. First of all, academic achievement was relatively straightforward for me. And I was embarrassed to say that with entrepreneurs, because the most entrepreneurs that I know, well, a lot of entrepreneurs I know, very successful, are dyslexic, did badly in school, were great at sports. I was terrible at sports in school, whereas I was very good at writing and reading and talking. And so there's almost an inverse correlation between those things. It's just weird. So that's one thing. The other thing, which kind of is ended up being more entrepreneurial, was that they both loved music, classical music particularly, and that became also a big influence on me. And that
Mm.
sort of eventually led to my first sort of forays into setting up my own organizations and things, I guess.
Oh, that's very interesting. So then what I also wanted to know where you guys are from. Like where did you grow up?
I'm from a place called Gloucester in the west of England, which I guess for Americans was the place where you imported some of your accent from, with a speaking like that, and we speak like car in Gloucester. So car, we say things like car in Gloucester, like Americans do a little bit. So
I
apart
love
from
your
that,
American accent.
no, that's my Gloucester accent. That's the accent of where I'm from. So it
That's
influenced.
great.
I think that in Bristol and places like that influenced the American accent. So that's where I'm
Yeah.
from. So I'm thoroughly English. I think I'm like a 30-second Scottish. I have no exotic background at all, which again is almost kind of embarrassing these days in a world of very diverse people. Like, I'm not at all diverse, if you like.
So, okay, you have a very traditional sort of upbringing. You have, the stage is set really for your parents to guide you really in their footsteps. But like you said, it wasn't prescriptive, just kind of the experience that they had. So when you were going to school, what were some of the choices that you were making, and that maybe could have led you in several different paths? Maybe a better question, a better way to phrase that would be, were there any turning points that you can remember in your younger childhood days or your early school days that were pivotal for you in making your choices?
Yeah, I think one example of me being terrible at making decisions, and one example of me actually setting stuff up and leading things, which I guess is the beginnings of entrepreneurship. When it came to decision making, I was terrible at making decisions at A levels, as we call it in Britain, when they're about the age of 16, 17, sort of pre-university exams, because you have to specialize like an insect in different, three subjects, maybe four. And for me, that was terrible because I wanted all of it. I was very curious, and I still am very, very curious about a really wide range of stuff, which is one of the reasons that I really like internet marketing, because it touches on everything, particularly
Yeah.
e-commerce. And my love of geopolitics and what's happening between America and China, where's
Mhm.
that going in the next few years, is directly relevant to my clients' profit or loss. It's
Yeah.
absolutely relevant, because if you slap a 30-40% tariff on something between two countries, that changes profit to loss. So,
Yeah.
that was one of the things where I couldn't decide between sciences and arts. And looking back, I'm not surprised. I wanted to do both. So that was
Yeah.
a sort of moment of indecision because I wanted everything and I couldn't have it. One of the things around that kind of time as well that started emerging is that I ran the house music competition, which is a sort of run by students at the school. Sort of we had what they called houses, like four little mini fraternities, not like the frats boys kind of thing, but it was just a way to get the students engaged, I guess. And I remember putting together an orchestra and a choir and leading the choir and organizing stuff. And that was good fun. And I guess sort of putting things together and putting groups together is something that is a pattern throughout my life, including in my e-commerce work as well.
Oh, that's very interesting. It sounds like music is really, really central for you.
Yeah, music's a big, big passion. I guess, like my parents, music's always been a big passion. For me, it was my job for quite a while before I got into e-commerce full time. And language is also one of those sort of stock in trades. If you think about it, a lawyer's medium is language, like an accountant's is numbers, and obviously a language teacher that my mum was. It's all about language. So yeah, those are the sort of twin, I guess, capability of language and the passion for music.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Can I ask this? Do you play any musical instruments?
I do. I play the piano, and I also conduct choirs. In fact, this evening I'm going to go and conduct an amateur choir. So I still keep my hand in. I do a little bit of piano teaching, partly so that my wife doesn't, because she was working 7 days a week, and I said,
Oh,
let me do one of those days to take the strain off you, so that you can relax a bit.
yeah.
And yeah, so I accompany things. I used to be a professional French horn player, which is a type of brass instrument in
Wow.
orchestras. So yeah, quite a big background in music.
Oh, that's amazing. And still classical from your early
Yeah,
childhood?
I do have a passion for jazz piano, which is more about improvisation, which
Mm.
again sort of links with some of the ways that, for better and for worse, I've operated in business. And improvisation means you can get started quickly with things, which is great. And then it also can mean that you're not very good at structuring things, which is generally very bad. So I guess I have a bit of a jazz mentality sometimes as well, and that's something I play on the piano as well.
This is why teams are so important, right?
Absolutely
Or
right.
bands
Yes.
in the case of music.
Absolutely correct. Yes. Yeah, you've got to have those balances between touch personality. And I
Yeah.
was reflecting on that before we came on because I knew you were going to ask me about myself. I thought, oh, no, in some ways everyone likes talking about themselves, but I'm always kind of embarrassed by my entrepreneurial journey. So even that phrase sounds too grand for what I've done so far.
Right.
But I was thinking, really, if you're a bit of a risk averse person, but not massively risk averse, as I somewhat am, or at least you overthink, maybe overanalyze, as I kind of sometimes do, the solution, as you say, is partnerships and teams. I mean, I
Yeah.
think my best partnerships have been with people who just get on with stuff. And then also there's the opposite, which is you've got to have the sustainability about things. And I tend to make stuff up on the fly. Like an interview situation is very comfort zone because I'm,
Yeah.
improvising my responses, if you will. But there's also the question of how to structure things and have longer term projects, which you need to find people who are good at that as well. So I'm
Mm.
gradually realizing that the way that I'm going to overcome my weaknesses isn't to try and become a different person, but to just find different people. You know.
Right. Yeah. No, it's funny that you bring that up. Actually, there's one of my, oh my goodness, friends since I was a kid. I used to work with him since I was 15 when I worked for my brother Steve. Um, his name is Michael Pinkowski, and he does this strengths-based leadership, and it's based on the Clifton Strengths, which
Hmm.
the whole premise of this is that we've been taught from so long, and for I don't even know how long now, from such a young age, though, that if you are not good at something, then you need to, raise up to the level so that everything can be the same level of mediocre, right? But Clifton Strengths actually teaches you that instead of leaning harder into your weaknesses to get them passing, that you should let them be weaknesses and lean instead into your strengths and get those astronomical, because not everyone has those strengths. So you can leave your strengths mediocre and bring your weaknesses up to match that, or you can really lean into your strengths. And I think it's so smart, and it's one of the premises I think that several big companies now use for their employees when they're trying to place them and build teams together.
It's interesting you should say that. I mean, I guess one of the things, the stories that I mentioned from school days, that I guess I was quite good at being all round, and therefore I wanted to stay more sort of broad and all round, sort of on the
Right.
academic front, for longer than I was allowed to by the education system in this country. And it still is similar to that these days.
Yeah.
Um, And yet, as an entrepreneur or would-be entrepreneur, I don't know, small business owner, let's call me that. Like, even the word entrepreneur sounds too grand compared to, I know a lot of people who, various levels have done incredible things. And I'm almost embarrassed to use that label about myself because I suppose I get sort of entrepreneurial shame, whereas most entrepreneurs I know had a tough time at school and are now doing really well as entrepreneurs, at least in waves. Nobody has, a great decade without any sort of peaks and troughs, I guess. But I guess my perception or my head trash, if you will, is that I need to be good at some of the stuff they're good at and being more decisive. And maybe you're right. You just have to work with who you are. And I guess in
Yeah,
the end, I'm getting there. When you banged your head against the brick wall a few years in a row, you eventually learn to stop trying to do things that don't work anyway, don't you? But
yeah,
I guess that system you're mentioning gives you kind of permission or even makes a virtue of it earlier. So I
yeah.
think that sounds like a really inviting way of thinking. I like it a lot.
Yeah, well, and what's interesting, especially given your earlier position, when you're going to school and stuff like that, and you're really limited on options. You want to learn everything. You are given very specific classes that you have to take to be an expert at, X, Y, or Z, or whatever your major is in your career path that you've chosen at such a young age that really, do we
Yeah.
even know?
Yeah, for me
Yeah,
it was way too early. I wanted sciences and history. For example,
yeah.
I still love physics. You can tell, like even as an example, my wife gave me this mug. I don't know if you can see it. It's got the
Oh, it's the
uh, uh,
periodic table.
is a periodic table, which I'm a big fan of, and I'm a
Mhm.
big fan of history and geopolitics. And for me, the kind of mathematical thinking and geopolitics both feed very directly into
Yeah,
business success or failure within e-commerce. So there is a link between these things, but you just got to find your own link. I guess it's almost like a jazz improvisation. I'm going to take a theme by
yeah,
Duke Ellington and I'm going to put some crazy chords under it and I'm going to put a different beat to what it was originally. And then suddenly you created something new that's a fusion of different elements. So I guess I'm gradually coming to terms with who I actually am. And instead of having that sort of entrepreneurial shame, like I'm not some kind of person that is the same as other entrepreneurs. I don't have the same drive in some ways or the same ability to follow through. And maybe I'm a bit more sensitive or worried than some people or more risk averse. I guess it comes to partnerships, doesn't it? As and you and
yeah,
I've worked on some partnerships together, and I guess that's the way forward for me. I mean, for better or for worse, that is my nature, and I think eventually when you stop fighting yourself
yeah,
to the point you made, then I'm still on a journey with that. I still judge myself and compare myself to others and think I should be more like this classic kind of entrepreneur that we've been led to expect through trillion, podcasts and sort of
and books
indoctrinated.
and yeah,
And I'm not that kind of guy. I'm not a kind of person that was bad at school and plays football and set up a lemonade stand at the age of 3. And my
right.
dad had a business and I worked in it. That's me at all. And I'm English as well, so I'm not even got that American kind of can do thing. So I just have to be who I am, I guess.
I think that's exactly it. What I think, it took me many years to learn this, and I for the first while I was like lamenting my, my own term, my own, it felt like way too long that it took me, my own journey to get to where I first, at my first business, even called myself an entrepreneur, and second, and CEO of my business that I started. So it was legit, but I was like, that's like for like important people.
Yeah,
It's like, that's not for me.
yeah.
So that was already difficult. But then the journey just kind of in your own mind of deciding, even if I'm not pursuing something right now, I do have this entrepreneurial drive to do something that is just me. And I think that that's really what the key is. It's not about having the same journey as other people who have this, kind of traditional, I guess, if you can call entrepreneurs traditional, what we've been led to believe as a traditional path for entrepreneurs to get to. Um, and, I think, by the way, that's why I'm doing this podcast, because everyone's journey is so, so different. But what I've realized is that you really have to understand that whatever it is that you're bringing to the table, whatever it is that makes you as a person unique, what you're bringing to your entrepreneurial journey, your entrepreneurial, podcast, whatever it is that you're putting out there, that's why people are watching it. It's not because it's the only podcast in the world. There's a million of them.
Hmm.
It's because of the element that you bring, the guest that you choose, the personality, and so whatever it is business wise that you're doing, I think that element, the way that you think about things, that's where the key is. And so if you're leaning into what makes you you, then that will only impact your business in a positive way, I think.
Thank you. Well, I feel like I owe you a coaching fee now for helping me overcome my reluctance to lean into my strengths here. So thank you very much.
I hope other people are getting some benefit out of this too, because I will say, as we're talking about this is part of why it is so common to feel, imposter syndrome and to compare to others. And, I do interview some people on this podcast who, they started at 3 years old selling candy, to their little friends and making, selling for 1 penny and making 2 pennies off or whatever. And this is one of those things that you're just like, wow, that's incredible. And it's so clear that you were meant to be an entrepreneur. And there are people who can move mountains with short notice. And so when you think like, I created something from nothing, that in comparison seems very small. But I think what's important to remember is that entrepreneurs are doers. You have ideas, whether it takes you a long time or not, you bring those ideas to life, and then don't rely on yourself, I hope, to make the entire thing come to life. I think, as we were saying before, a team is necessary.
I think you're right. The phrase doers is a really interesting one in relation to entrepreneurship, because that's another one of my sort of hang-ups. And I think it's not wrong to see that entrepreneurs are people who make stuff happen. I think that
Yeah.
is absolutely bang on and correct. But what I would say is this, that there is a value to reflection. And that's one of the things, again, it's a partnership thing that maybe I'm better at and naturally given to reflection. Like, who would have thought with a lawyer dad and a teacher mum that I would be given to reflection? That's crazy. I mean, of course I am. I've been trained in it with my mother's milk, literally. But what I would say is that there are people who don't take action and think about entrepreneurship, which was me for like 15 straight years, fantasizing about having a job, if you like, or a business. That's not going to get you business, of course.
Yeah.
But then the next level that I see a lot of people, it reminds me of a phrase, to quote Anthony Robbins. Sorry, this is a very cliche thing to do on an entrepreneurship program. He says a Japanese proverb, which is action without vision is so vision without action is a daydream, and that's most of us most of the
Yeah.
time, and that included me for a long time. And I tend to err in that direction when I go wrong, and that needs to be overcome, of course, because doing, as you said, is really important. But the other half of it is action without vision is a nightmare. And what I
Mm-hmm.
can say for absolute certainty is that in the private rooms of the masterminds we run in London, there are a lot of people who are taking a heck of a lot of action. They're doing vigorous, they're getting results, but they're mostly getting results for their clients who love their products, or their
Right.
customers, and Amazon, who's making a lot of money off them, and they're making a handful of percent of profit. And at that point, the reflection piece is one of the things we do in a master. We say, right, you're going to leave your place of business. You're going to travel possibly from the other side of Europe to come to London. And we're going to sit together and we're going to think outside of your business about your business. And
Mm.
people talk about working on your business, not on your business. Well, that implies you've got to stop doing and start thinking. And
Yeah.
at that level of things, suddenly the ability to reflect and think, maybe overthink, in my case, becomes of actual real value to other people,
Mm.
because they're mostly geared to doing. That reflection is an exception to their routine now, and mostly doing and a certain amount of powerful reflection. For me, I think that combination is really powerful. And so maybe this is how I found my niche. I'm the kind of, maybe I'm always going to be less good at doing than other people, but if I help them to reflect on how they're doing, that brings massive value to them. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's been really the best thing I've done in business so far, I think. And that's why I guess I've never
Yeah.
really reflected on it with anyone else before, but this is maybe why it works.
I think that's, I mean, maybe a huge insight into yourself right now, because honestly, I think you're absolutely right. One thing I absolutely did with my first business, first of all, is I just started doing stuff because I didn't know what I was doing and I didn't know how. And it was like, I mean, supreme level of ignorance. And so
Yeah.
I was reading books and I'm like, I'm getting advice from my brother. And even when you're getting answers back, it's with, this sort of premise that this much, and so even the feedback and information that you're getting is mildly helpful but not extremely helpful. And I remember even reading back the E-Myth after I'd read it the first time, and I was like, okay, I guess this kind of helps. And then years later, with some entrepreneurial knowledge, actually getting something more out of that. It's a different read for me each time I go back to it.
It's very
um,
interesting that particular book. I would say I had the exact same experience. I think I read it in the 90s of all times, like pretty much
is that
after it
right?
came out in the late 90s, and it kind of meant something theoretically. And I've reread it, almost annually the last few years,
Yeah.
because it's just become one of the sort of go-to thought structures, or frames of reference. And I think it's a good one for, again, thinking. It's not necessarily a very practical book it's not very how to for an
Right.
e-commerce based entrepreneur because the examples are from physical retail stores and the pie shop and all that stuff. And if you haven't read it, if you're listening, I thoroughly recommend it. But it's
Yes, by
great at
Michael
giving that
Gerber.
framework of if you take nothing else from it, the technician, the manager, and the entrepreneur. I used that just the other day as a sort of reference point for a coaching discussion, and it had immediate effects because people have a framework of reference of thinking about what they do. So to the point of doing versus thinking, if you have an ability to spend 20 minutes a day thinking about the doing piece and you are develop self-awareness about what it is you're doing, like are you
Hmm.
just doing stuff? Are you building a business? Are you managing a team? That's
Right.
really powerful. So I guess, yeah, self-awareness seems to be a theme that's emerging today, doesn't it? I guess it's something that is less bro culture and more particularly, I suppose, traditionally a feminine virtue to be self-aware. And I don't know, maybe we're both more like on that feminine vibe than
Yeah, I think,
your
I mean,
average entrepreneur.
self-awareness, honestly, I feel like that's it's a strength that is underrated, really.
Mm,
And I think that it's a big one for you that you know, this whole conversation that we're having, I think it's insightful for me to learn a little bit more about you. But I think this is very telling um, about your strengths, you know, and that actually something that is kind of a weakness for most entrepreneurs is a strength for you. I think that's really important to note because anyone who's listening, again, I'm sure everyone who's listening has had imposter syndrome, has felt like a fraud at one point or another, or felt like they didn't measure up to some of the entrepreneurs that they've seen on social media or just talked to at events. And knowing that you could be underrating a strength of yours that other entrepreneurs struggle with is really impactful, I think. So I appreciate that. But I do want to continue with your life journey, if you don't mind. So I'm curious now, as you're growing up and you're going through school, um, so you had to do like some serious studying because on that side of the pond, you guys have like, you have to like prepare for particular career paths. How does that work?
yeah, well, I guess A levels are traditionally a preparation for university studies. They're academic rather than sort of career oriented. So I did French, German, history, and English literature. The only one I really regret is English literature out of that lot. I'd say language as an English language is incredibly valuable, and for copywriting and whatever for marketing, it's incredibly directly useful.
Yeah.
Um, but English literature, I'm not anti-literature, but I could have lived without analyzing that. I kind of wish I'd done physics or something like that was
Mhm.
more numerative, or maths or something. But yeah, so that it's, I guess, traditionally seen as academic, but then we have quite short degrees in England. In Scotland, it's different. England and Wales, we have 3-year degrees traditionally, which
Mm.
is quite short.
Yeah.
And then suddenly after that, you do your vocational training. So, for example, you go and study history for 3 years and then go and retrain as a lawyer or something. That's a common kind of
Right.
career path here.
Oh wow, that's interesting. It's a little bit different than how we do things over here. Although I
Yeah.
will say, I didn't take a super traditional route in the end myself. I intended to, and then in the end, I was like, this is not for me. So I don't know that that my own path is or that our traditional path is the right one. So tell me about when you were going to school and you're choosing like this vocational path. Were you thinking you wanted to have a normal job? Did you have something in mind that you were pursuing at that time?
Yeah, not really a normal job. I guess I was pursuing, I was a bit confused about university choices. Again, I wanted to keep things broader than we're able to. And I know that in Scotland, as we do in, I think, the US and in many countries around the world, you have a broader sort of base of subjects in the first year or two at university or college or school, or as you call it there,
Hmm.
followed by the getting more narrow. And that's more or less what I wanted to do. And that wasn't really an option. So I started off doing a languages degree. And although I have an ability in languages, I started doing French and German. And I do speak fluent German, but I kind of wasn't that passionate about it. Whereas music was a passion, even though I was good at music, I had a talent for it, but not necessarily quite as much as for languages. But I ended up switching over to doing music, which was um, not the obviously it's a classic thing that one should not be doing arts as a job. I mean, I think there are many artists and particularly composers and classical music writers over the decades and centuries who have been told by their parents to go and become doctors or lawyers and have ended up becoming poets and music writers. So I guess my parents didn't object strongly because they love music, But nevertheless, the answer to your question, what is the career path in that? Well, career paths in performing arts are quite messy. So there was no clear cut, after I do this, I'm going to do that. But there was basically an aim to become a professional performer. And quite early on, I decided I wanted to become an orchestra conductor because being the boss looked attractive and sexy and fun. And,
And you get to
and
hold that stick.
you get to hold the stick, yeah, which is the whole thing. Yeah, you get to, yeah, there is something about wielding the stick that feels a little bit like an Expelliarmus moment. When it works really well,
Right.
you almost feel like a wizard because you bring the stick down in a certain kind of way and you get a certain response once you've trained people and if you know what you're doing and if you've got a good orchestra and. It's very conditional. But when you get it right, there is a kind of magic about it. Just for like with entrepreneurship, you click a button and you send a load of emails and then suddenly money rolls in. And of
Right.
course, if you don't set everything up right, nothing happens. It's
Yeah.
the same thing. But there is a kind of magic about both situations where there's a kind of form of, there's almost a feeling of magic about it. And there is something about e-commerce and internet-based marketing in particular that has something of the same magic that conducting had, the same allure, which is you kind of how you're controlling with a small movement a very powerful outcome.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, and by the way, extra points for the Harry Potter reference. That just
Yeah,
made my
thank you.
day.
Yeah, yeah. Expelliarmus. Yeah. There is something about, yeah, I mean, I guess like conducting is the closest you get to waving a magic wand and actually getting paid for it, so it's pretty cool from that point of view when it works.
So okay, so you had this idea you wanted to be the conductor, and so what did you pursue once you completed your studies? What were you pursuing in that kind of general pursuit? Because you wanted to do something where you're performing, and that was sort of the larger goal. But what were you doing to pursue that?
So specifically, I went into a postgrad. So I guess you would have a similar sort of path in the States or other countries like that. In French horn playing, which was to be part of an orchestra professionally. And the reason I did that was I knew already that I wanted to be a conductor, but I didn't think again it's imposter syndrome kicking in. But I
Mm,
didn't feel ready, and I felt that I should be, if you're like a technician within that situation before I then tried to promote myself
right.
to being a manager. And so a few years later, I did go and study conducting, but it was rather late in the day because there's still quite harsh so competitions for professional classical performers, probably similar to ballet and a lot of other sort of traditional routes, um, have a pretty harsh age limit. And so I really didn't leave myself enough time by doing that. So if I did it all again, I'd go straight for what I wanted rather
Mm,
than going a sort of another route. I mean, you never know how things are going to pan out, but I guess that would be my sort of quick summary of the next steps, really.
yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, I think that kind of feeds into the same kind of thing where a lot of entrepreneurs get into this, analysis paralysis. Do I need to know more before I do something? Do I need,
Hmm.
am I just stalling? Is this procrastination? It comes in so many different forms. I think this is maybe not on the entrepreneur side of things, but I think it's still relevant in that type of mindset.
Hmm. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the equivalent would be if I'm going to sell face cream, I need to learn how to make face cream and be a chemist. I mean,
Right,
yeah, you know what? You probably would make amazing face cream, but that's not necessarily the only path. And I
right.
suppose I put a very, very high, but I think ironically because I respected the profession I was aiming for so much conducting that I put too high a barrier on myself to achieve it.
Hmm.
Um, and I think entrepreneurs sometimes do that. I mean, quite often they
Yeah.
do the opposite. They don't have enough respect for the fact that if you're going to sell supplements, you should know some stuff about biochemistry and
Mm.
you should go to the gym and be good at what you do. Um, or hire a person who does. But I mean, a lot of people fall into the trap of not doing enough stuff and enough stuff. What do I mean? I mean not understanding the nuts and bolts of the area they're
Right.
trying to become a leader of some kind in. But the opposite can be true as well. And I think that traditionally women are seen as falling into the trap of being overly conscientious and lacking confidence relative to men who just run around the world doing stuff without knowing what they're doing. And
Right.
I've done elements of both, but I think I fall more on the traditionally female side of trying to be perfectionist before I move. And
Hmm.
I think there is a balance to be struck that's really hard, and there's no magic answer, but there is a balance in the middle that if you find that sweet spot that for entrepreneurship is about right, which is to say, if you're too perfectionist, somebody else will spot the opportunity before you do. And by the time you enter the market, you have a perfect product, but it's too late. And then
Hmm.
the opposite is true, which is if you launch with a terrible product and poison a load of people and get sued, that's like the opposite extreme. But you know what I mean? That can also backfire pretty heavily. And in a less extreme way, you have a terrible product, you get 1-star reviews on Amazon, and your product is finished. That's quite common as well.
We're getting a deep dive into the mind map of analysis paralysis right now. No, I think it's very valid, and I think it's something that sellers struggle with, and especially right now. Like, I think one of the big things that's on people's minds right now that kind of is like, do I wait? Do I go? Is trying to figure out like a good schedule for like their inventory management and getting their products shipped, because there's so many delays. And so you're trying to say, okay, do I take the risk and order extra, and then kind of slow drip it from my 3PL? And so there's a risk that you're taking in order to be more secure, to keep your listing on page 1 or whatever, because if you run out of stock, of course you're going to lose your ranking. Or, do I be conservative about this and just hope that everything works out because I'm, tight on cash flow? And, so I think that there's always that from so many different angles, whether it's from inventory management or, what you were just mentioning before, or even outside of entrepreneurship and outside of Amazon selling. Do I pursue my overall goal and just go straight for it? Or do I really learn everything I can about it, because I also love doing that. And I think there's so many things that go into that. I think personality is a big part of it. I think outside influences and, your environment and how you grew up, I think all of that plays into it. Also, big one, I think, and I'd love your feedback on this, the people you surround yourself with. People say that the 5 people closest to you have the biggest impact on who you're going to be and how successful you're going to be. So I think that is true. And I think that has an impact on whether we act or whether we wait. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's very true. And I think what is interesting is for a lot of us transitioning into entrepreneurship, certainly true for me, as you've gathered from my background, but for many, many people out there, um, their natural peers, as in the people that were kind of a similar income bracket and the people they hung out with the most, have no idea about online entrepreneurship and not much idea
Mm,
about entrepreneurship. And they certainly haven't got a Scoobies about the sort of e-commerce specifics. And that's why a mastermind can be a really powerful thing if it's the right people and well run. Because I really think that otherwise you just have no chance to even reflect with, never mind emulate people in the same kind of aiming for similar things and in the same
mhm.
environment. So I think it's really critical. I think peer groups um, are interesting because they work in a less conscious way. If you hire a coach, it's because you know that you need a coach. Probably if you hire specific consultant, and if you're smart you will get a fractional CFO or at least a good accountant in,
Mhm.
and that's for a specific reason. But mastermind is harder to sell, I find, because articulating the value is harder because it happens at an almost unconscious level. You start to be enthused by and inspired by stuff. You also have sibling rivalry that kicks in, like you're all brothers and sisters if you're like in a big family, and you go,
Mm.
why is that guy's not as smart as I, hasn't worked as hard and has been in business for half the length of time, particularly for men, not only, but men particularly. It's like, why am I like that? And it's kind of a primitive, almost unconscious desire to be the top dog, to use
Right.
another sort of animal tribal metaphor. And that's a really powerful motivator and reason why people succeed or fail. And this is one of the secrets for why the teenagers do what they do. It's not really about their parents at that point. It's peer influences why people
Mhm.
get into smoking or drugs or suddenly go from being a terrible student to really being inspired. It's because a friend of theirs or their peer group really gets into something. So I think that's a really powerful mechanism
Yeah.
to invoke, if you like. I don't think it's as conscious as I'm going to get my finances in order by hiring an accountant. It's like join a peer group and then let the dynamics work on you and influence you.
Right. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I think that's so true. I really, it's just let it happen, because if you are surrounding yourself by those people, you can't help but have their energy rub off on you. And you're as long as you're all interested in the same thing, then you have something to talk about, and so that gets you excited, and you kind of feed off each other. So I'm curious now, how is it that you got from music then and pursuing this orchestra,
Yeah.
or a conductor kind of career path, to now where you are doing a podcast and you're fully integrated into the e-commerce community? Where did that transition take
Yeah,
place?
a crazy move. I guess what happened is that I was pitched into it, to put it bluntly. But I mean, I was in a community of people that was being trained in how to market themselves as
Mm,
coaches, and I was, coaching in music, and enjoyed that. And I guess part of me, from about the age of 25, having sort of immersed into the world a couple of years out of university, and realizing that I was likely to spend the rest of my life teaching beginners musical instruments if I was not careful. And the reality of, it's a bit like trying to be an author, which is a much more mainstream than trying to be a conductor, right? Most people will not become J.K. Rowling, to reference Harry Potter again,
mhm.
um, and make, $500 million or something. They will actually make $5,000 a year if they actually publish, which is maybe 1% of authors. And then of that 1%, maybe 1% will make a living wage from it. And I know a few published authors and a lot of published business authors now, of course. But so I guess when reality bites, the question is, well, what do you do next? And I was thinking, well, actually, I don't want to spend all my life, just doing a conventional path of teaching one-to-one in schools with kids who don't really want to learn. I love teaching, but I love teaching people who want to learn and are eager and hungry
Mhm.
for it. And yeah, so I started from about the age of 25-ish, so like my mid 20s, investigating having a sort of side hustle, if you like, of some kind of business. And that's really how I got into entrepreneurship. And then e-commerce came out of that because the person who was teaching people how to sell their own abilities as coaches,
Mm.
transitioned his whole group wholesale, basically because of a very sweet affiliate deal. I think he saw the dollar signs, to be honest, and sold about 300 of us into a I will not name the program because I'll probably say a couple of rude things about it as well as good things. To sell on Amazon, and got launched in my first actual business that made money and profits.
Wow, that's amazing. And so, do you mind if I ask? I don't know if this is still an active product or brand for you. What category of product were you selling at that time?
Yeah, that's no longer active for me. But yeah, the first product category you might not be surprised to learn was in music because it's something I knew about and cared about. And I
Shocking.
think the knowing, yeah, the knowing about it was a good thing. The caring about it um, is I mean, if you care about music, but you're producing a product that is a physical product for a very specific use, I guess it probably helps more if you care about physical products. And that's
Mhm.
one nuance that if I were going to sort of look back and do it all again, I guess I would say going into market where I understood the use case and the needs of the audience was a very good move. But developing my own products, well, I was trained to do it that way, but doing it again, it's pure private label product back in
Right.
2014. And if I did it all again, I'd probably get away from pure private label much earlier. And I would, work with or partner with in some form somebody who really was passionate about physical product development, which is not my
Right.
strength.
Yeah, I think honestly, I think that there's so many ways to go about this. I think the one thing that is sold super often right now is, have your own private label, build your own brand, have your own product line, and it, there's two schools of thought on whether it's important or not to be passionate about the product that you
Mm.
are selling. I think if you don't care and you just that like you can do the math and you can do the PPC and you understand the fundamentals of inventory management and sourcing and stuff like that, then you can get a product to sell regardless of what the product is, because you're probably hiring out the branding and the social media and stuff like that that makes it passionate, that makes it fun. So the person who is actually passionate about that product really should be partnering with them to come up with the sourcing, the ideas for the product, to make sure that it's a workable product and it solves the problems that the customer is looking at, and can then do something like some social media, TikTok videos, lessons, right? You could do TikTok lessons with whatever the instrument is that you're selling, and somebody else can be managing the actual sales. I think that we really need to step away from looking at this as a one-dimensional way to do things and think
Mm.
about it, just like you were saying, there's more than one way to look at this, and to lean into your strengths, where I think so far it's been given to us as sort of a template move.
I agree with that. I think when it comes to creating a private label or these days more of a custom product business, um, I do think it matters. I think the correlation between the people I know who've done really, really well and actually really care about the products themselves, the product development and their functionality and their beauty and so
Yeah.
forth, I think it really matters. And if
Mhm.
that's not you personally, to your point, doesn't have to be one person. I mean, I'm
Right.
not a product person, so I'm not going to ever again try to create a product-based business where I am the product development guy, because I
Mhm.
just don't care about it enough, and I don't have the skill set to develop.
Right.
I don't have the skill set already, and I don't care enough to develop it. Whereas I, weirdly enough, do care about cash flow projections. That actually makes me quite excited, which is quite weird, but it's my
What
nerdy
is it?
analytical side. Cash flow projections and
Cash
things like that.
flow projections, of course. Know your
I'm not
numbers.
saying I have I'm not saying I have a great accounting background, and I would be wise to work with people who are accounting experts, but at least I have an interest in developing that. And
Mm,
the whole sort of business strategy and the marketing and branding, where I do have
right.
the background and skill set, really interests me. So I'm now working with a couple of people to develop sort of some kind of joint ventures, whether we'll own it. When there's discussions, it's fairly early stages with, what's the ownership structure, and is it revenue share, is it profit share, is it pure agency, whatever it is. The point is that kind of partnership with people who are really obsessed with and really
Mm,
expert at the product development side. In some cases, they've done qualifications on their factories have jumped through hoops that would take me years to
mm,
get. I mean, that's super smart. And I'm so to your point about, leaning into your strengths and recognizing your weaknesses. I mean, I guess my biggest failures really have come from trying to do everything because I was taught that's how I was supposed to do it,
right.
and the strengths have come from, the wins have come from not following a course and following my natural inclination.
It's gotta be, right? It's gotta be when you do what feels right, things work out. And of course, not everything is always going to work out, but I think it is much more likely to work out when you are leaning into your strengths than if you're trying to duplicate what somebody else is being successful at. So tell me then, how did you go from selling this product-based business? Now you're telling me that you're looking into, some partnerships and things like that. What about your podcast? Where did that enter into things?
Well, I guess I've always enjoyed. That was another one of the many sort of careers that I considered in my youth, if you like. That I always enjoyed listening to radio for quality non-fiction radio, because unlike TV, which is all about kind of shock and awe, and if you're going to have a podcast about the economy, you have to keep showing photos of people making stuff in factories. And I kind of feel like I know what factories look like. It doesn't add anything to me
Right.
intellectually. So I feel radio is a stripped down, simple medium that communicates more value in a shorter time than things like TV or now YouTube or whatever. And I feel that and books are kind of my favorite thing. So when I started listening to some podcasts, when I was educating myself about the Amazon business, and I listened to some things, I thought I could do this. And I thought, I'd scratch another itch that I'd not got around to scratching, and be, do my own radio thing. And I was talking about it to anyone who would listen anyway. And so I thought, well, why don't I just record my thoughts? So I did my own sort of show of just sort of solo episodes for a few months, and then somebody got in touch with me and sort of put me into a private mastermind he was running, and he had a ton of contacts that he was very generous about sharing
Mm,
with me for a while. So I got launched with doing things through interviews, and then it becomes self-perpetuating after a while. Now in the fortunate position where a lot of people reach out to us, and we have to have sort of templates and application forms and stuff to get on the podcast, because people know about it now. So potential guests approach us generally these days, or I've bumped into them via other guests and they've introduced me. So that's how it all got started.
that's amazing. I love these ones where we talk about something and it's just sort of this naturally evolving process. Something you're interested in, you try a thing out, it sort of starts to build on its own, which tells you, you're leaning into the right area, and then you can kind of build from there. I love your podcast. I love, several of the guests that you've had on there. I really enjoy, and I know personally, and I am excited to continue to watch you grow on that. I want to quickly let people know real quick, what they would do if they want to get in touch with you, if they want to chat with you about, consulting services, or about Amazon, or sorry, Amazing FBA. How would they reach you to do that?
Sure. So if they want to hear the podcast, just look for Amazing FBA or the 10K Collective podcast, which is the content which is geared to 6, 7, 8 figure Amazon sellers, which is basically the same thing now. I won't get into my attempt at rebranding that didn't really work. So either will get you the same thing. Um, and then if you want to work with me, I mean, one-to-one, I will work with people in the startup phase who are pre-revenue, but you're way more likely to get value from a coach, including me, if you already have some kind of traction.
Yeah.
So just go to amazingfba.com/mentoring to apply for that. And then if you want to join the masterminds, we've got one for those doing at least about, in dollar terms, about $40,000-$50,000 a month. And most of the people are based in Europe, because we have meetings every 2 months in London, I should say, so London, England. So it's probably helpful to be on the right side of the pond for that. And we are about to start a mastermind for people doing just 6 figures a year, so about $9,000 a month upwards. For the established mastermind, go to www.theamazonmastermind.com. Amazingly, Amazon's lawyers have not got in touch, so I've still got that URL. And for the new mastermind, for the lower sellers doing just 6 figures, sort of bare 6 figures, $8,000 a month or so, just email me, michael@amazingfba.com, michael@amazingfba.com.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for that, Michael. And I want to give you a special thank you. It's not easy to dive in deep and to get personal, and especially where, we were talking about some mindset things and really self-discovery. So I really appreciate you being open and vulnerable to have that discussion. Hopefully the people who are listening will get a lot out of that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a little bit scary, but actually it's interesting to dive into, because the more I get on with this stuff, I think it's not just an abstract thing to say that mindset matters. It's obvious that mindset
Yeah.
matters in a level, but in what particular ways is the interesting thing. And I think self-awareness is, as we've discussed, and I think I've kind of realized through today's discussion a little bit more than I did before, is really important. And I think
Yeah.
that's true for my clients who are, actively building very big and healthy e-commerce businesses, that
Mhm.
that is not a side issue, it's a central issue. You've got to know who you are and lean into your
Oh
strengths. So
yeah.
your point of permission for leaning into strengths. So thank you for putting that message out there. I'm a grateful recipient of that, and hopefully the listeners are as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate your time today. And for you guys, we'll see you next week on Amaze on Stream. Thanks so much. Take care.